Perfect. Okay, somebody was trying to join. Dan, somebody? Yeah. I would.
Can people hear this?
Okay, he did. He joined. Yeah.
How about this?
By all means.
Oh, turn anything off. Hopefully. Yeah, I don't see anything about microphones.
Where is the microphone in here?
Right here.
It's the,
Yeah. Yeah. No one's out there. Okay. There's 5 people on the call. Oh, yeah, look at
yeah,
that.
it's not free.
Can you guys hear us, anybody?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. Can you see the screen?
Can you hear this?
We can see the screen and you guys. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, I'll go ahead and get started then, I guess. Or I don't know, give it another minute. Yeah. We did say 2 people.
I don't think you saw.
Can you guys hear this over here?
Can you hear any tapping? I see the microphone in places too.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. They can hear us. Well, hopefully they'll be able to hear us well.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think the quiet people are next to Steve. I think that's where the microphone is.
All right. Well, anyway, I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. People asked me to talk about Kdevops a little bit today, and so that's what I'm going to talk about. If you're not a Linux kernel developer, you may not find this terribly enthralling, but for for everybody else, hopefully you'll find this enlightening. So anyway, Kdevops, what is it? So it's a project that was put together by Louise Chamberlain, or he started it anyway, a few years ago, mostly to do, that he uses to do testing, a lot of XFS tests, stuff like that, but he does some other stuff too. And essentially what it is it's Chuck asked me to look at it because he was interested in us putting together some CI for NFSd, which we don't, when we kind of came into the project, we didn't have very robust testing. And so we would get regressions a lot.
Bruce did all the testing in his basement, and then when he retired, that sort of went away.
Yeah. So anyway, we're trying to be a little bit more rigorous with our testing and see if we can, avoid some regressions. So anyway, Kdevops, it's basically a, like I said, it's a project that's hosted on GitHub, but basically it's a big hairball of Ansible scripts layered on top of either Vagrant or Terraform, which are technologies for spinning up VMs. And then there's a bunch of Python and shell scripts in it and stuff too. It's a whole pile of different stuff, which kind of seems to be the nature of the beast for CI type projects, right? Anytime I've ever seen one, they're always a bit janky and based on a lot of scripting. So in any case, the main thing that underpins Kdevops is that there are really 2 backends on it. There's one that uses Vagrant, and Vagrant is another project that is used to spin up virtual machines on a local hypervisor. And then there's also Terraform, a different backend which is Terraform, which serves a similar purpose. It's spinning up virtual machines, but does them in the cloud. So it has like plugins for all the different different cloud providers. Okay, there's an Azure one, there's an AWS one, there's Oracle. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of them. Most people that are using this today are using the Vagrant backend. The Terraform stuff works basically, but occasionally, in particular with the NFS server, we end up not using, or we end up needing more storage than is provisioned a lot of times in the cloud hosts, and so it may or may not work very well there. So there's some work that still needs to be done there. But in any case, like I said, if you're a kernel developer, one of the things that the thing that Kdevops, the way you configure Kdevops is using kconfig, which is something we're all pretty familiar with. And so usually the first stop when you after you download the tree is to do a make menu config, which is we're all pretty familiar with that, right? So, and what you'll see is it'll give you a whole bunch of options, for the in there. And much like the kernel kconfig, it's not very well organized, right? There's like stuff that's, it tries to be organized, but there's, a lot of things that are, settings that are not in their ideal locations and maybe not perfect, right? If you are doing this the first time, I kind of recommend it's kind of like doing your first kernel build. You have to kind of like walk through the kconfig a bit to sort of understand how things are laid out. You probably want to do the same here, right? Like this says, is this your first time running Kdevops on the system? The good news is that there's a lot of good help text in the kconfig options. So like in this one, like he's got a whole paragraph about which tells you basically what this option is going to do for you. So if you go in there and look at all the help text, you can usually get a pretty good idea. But basically, if you do this, it'll like set up some stuff for you. Like it tries to disable SE Linux and stuff, which is actually not necessary, but we're, it used to be, it can run on different architectures. So we can, it's got support for x86-64, ARM, PPC. I've done a little bit with PPC on a cloud provider or on an OpenStack provider that I had access to, but I haven't done much with that. After it spins up your guests, it will put some stuff in SSH. It will it can change your SSH config so you can SSH into it. Like I said, this thing, if you walk through in order, it's the things are sort of jumbled in a sort of a random order for settings. But
how many settings that? If you go down what's the last page? How many?
Oh, I mean, that's where it ends right there.
Yeah, it ends right there.
Yeah, but there's like submenus and submenus and submenus and stuff like that too. So you kind of got to drill down through like this. Like this one here is like where it says bring up methods, right? It's going to. This is like talking about how it's going to spin up the guests for you. Like do you want to use Vagrant? Do you want to use Terraform? Or you can use bare metal or existing nodes if you've got that too. So I guess we can do that as well. So I didn't know that was possible. Mostly I use libvirt because it's free. And so, apparently you can run this like on an Apple host and use VirtualBox. Maybe not, for some folks that may make more sense. So, but anyway, it's got lots of settings, how many CPUs you want, how much memory you want, blah, blah, all kinds of stuff. It can do things like build QEMU for you. So if you've got you need experimental QEMU features, you can pull that down and do that for you too. And then it's got, and then there's some information here about storage drivers that are used, right? For instance, you can tell it to use BirdIO or NVMe. I'm using NVMe because, at least in theory, the NVMe driver they say is potentially faster than BirdIO. Because it's a more modern design, and so the BirdIO stuff doesn't have as much parallelization, I think, and so the NVMe tends to be a good choice. So anyway, you can set all this stuff. One of the things it does is when you spin up a guest, it slurps down a cloud image, from so like if you want to do a Fedora guest, right, it will pull down one of the cloud-based images and drop a copy of that file on a somewhere on the host and then use that to boot off of, right? But it will also build, it also builds these, it will spin up some sparse files that it will use as back-end disks for the guest, right? So usually it'll give you a 400 gig sparse files that are, that get presented as disks into the guests.
And they're local persistent files.
Local persistent, well, they're persistent files, but these are not persistent guests. Sort of the idea of Vagrant and Terraform is that you were spinning up these things as throwaway guests, right? You go, you run some tests on them, and then you tear them down and never look at them again.
But it creates a local sparse file.
Yes.
For you.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, well, it doesn't really populate. It just creates the file and hands it to QEMU and says, present this as a disk to the guests. So, but each guest, at least in the Vagrant configs, generally gets 4 of these disks. And we use them in different ways. So
Who pulls the guest images? Is it the config process or something?
well, you decide what Vagrant guest distribution you want to use.
Yeah, you choose
And then-
that.
And then Vagrant has this thing called, they build these things called boxes. Okay, and then these boxes sort of are, it's sort of information about the guest image itself and a little bit of meta information too, I think. I don't know much about box construction, but so I'm strictly a user of this
It's got a
kind of.
URL for the
Yeah.
object that it's going to fetch.
Yeah, basically it goes and pulls these things down from, but I think they have a registry kind of, like, this is a HashiCorp project and they have like a registry of different boxes that are available. Some of,
Previously sparse.
So they're pre-built, certified,
yeah.
signed, sealed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, certified, some of them are certified, some of them are, sort of questionable provenance, so we can, but you got to kind of make a judgment of what you want to use. I've been using the Fedora and the RHEL ones, and those are, done by the Fedora and RHEL, by Red Hat or the Fedora project. And there's some Debian ones. I've used the Debian ones before too, and stuff. So you can use really anything you want. There's SUSE, there's Debian. At least all the major distros are represented here.
Oh, wow.
And so I use at one time it said there was a different setting for Red Hat for RHEL, I guess, but I decided it was just too much. Some of the Kconfig stuff is a little overblown, where they try to do too much with like radio button selectors, where you really just need a string. So I kind of went and reworked some of the stuff. So, I added the stuff recently where you can register the host with Red Hat too. So if you've got RHEL guests and you want to do that, I can spin those up and actually register them and
Registers the guest or registers the thing that's running.
it registers the guests. Yeah. If you want to run if the host, you got to do that yourself. So, so I need to probably because it says register this host, but I need to go and probably reword that, because they probably register the guests. Basically, is probably what it should say. You can make it install libvirt, blah blah blah. There's lots of options. A lot of this was set up originally to do testing on local file systems. So XFS, ButterFS guys are pretty heavy contributors to this stuff, and so. A lot of what I did was they would kind of come in and just added NFS support. Like they already had done the work for FS. Oh, sorry. Let me put that back up again.
So they have some pre-baked testing environments.
Right. I'll talk about that here in just a sec. Once it spins up the guests, it brings up, you can tell it like, here's what I want you to do after you bring up the guests, right?
Oh,
So it will do, you can tell it to update the things, or I did this thing where it will add a custom Yum repo if you want. That's nice for if I'm testing a kernel that's being built out of like GitLab or GitLab stuff. I can point it at the CKI repo that it's got and tell it to slurp that down, right? So I've been able to do some testing locally with that. But like one of the things I said was, I had to set up the kernel NFS server, and so what it does. For this is when you tell it to set up a kernel NFS server, it will spin up an extra guest, and that guest is a dedicated NFS server. And I went through several gyrations on how to do all this stuff, because
Well, it's a separate guest. It's not
Yes.
configuring the NFS server in the current, it's a, oh,
We'll do, most of them get spun up as clients, and then we will spin up a separate host as the NFS server. So, and so when it does that, and so you can set all the, twiddle all the options here and tell it what disks you want it to use and stuff, right? But I went through a bunch of different work with this because like originally I'd set it up fairly simply to do this stuff, but then I found that, you know, when we were doing a lot of this testing, we were running these tests in parallel because we got multiple guests and and I kind of wanted them to hammer the NFS server pretty hard, you know, so running tests in parallel against the same NFS server is a good thing, you know, because we want it to stress it out.
Is it a guest, a VM?
Yes, yes, VM guest.
So that's
Yeah.
they're equal.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
And so what I had was and so I recently reworked the storage configuration on the server. So sort of like way it works now is that when we spin up a guest to do a test, the guest sort of says, okay, I need 2 exports for this test I'm going to do, right? You know, and it will go and create those exports on the NFS server using Ansible.
scratch and test. or
Yeah, scratch and test. You know, for PyNFS, I have a separate export for 4.0 and 4.1. You know, so that kind of stuff. You know, you can do anything you really want, really. You know, there's a limits to the amount of storage that I have on the NFS server, but you know, as long as you're conservative about how you do it, it's not too bad. So anyway, once we do that, there's some stuff you can twiddle with the syscontrol here, but where once you've brought up the guests, you know, the next thing it's going to do is these workflow, it's going to do what they call a workflow, right? And the workflow is basically the test cases that it's going to do. So, well, test cases and building a kernel, right? Because one of the things we want to do is test kernels. So, you know, you can basically give it some info about you know, what kernel you want it to build. All right, now I have it pointed at my tree, and then I, you know, a particular branch, right? So it's been kind of nice. I can just go, like if I'm working on a series of patches, I can just push them out to a branch in my public tree and then go and say, you know, do a bunch of make targets, which I'll show you here in a minute. But then we go and it will pull it will spin up guests, build kernels for them, boot them to those kernels, and then start kicking off the testing. So it's, you know, a lot less manual than I usually
Hours
do.
of typing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really kind of revolutionized my workflow and doing testing. You know, I do a lot better. I'm testing just because I'm able to do it pretty trivially now. You know,
Yeah, it just-
How long does it take? I mean, you know, depending on the machine, I'm sure, but you know, from the kernel
depends on the machine.
to the end of the test, or the beginning of the test.
Well, it depends on the test, and that's one of, you know.
But how long? I guess my better question is, how long does it take from the beginning of this to the beginning of the test? I know testing.
Well, again, it depends on how much. Well, here, like when it builds the kernel, the way we do it with Vagrant guests. So if you were spinning up Terraform hosts in the cloud, it just builds a kernel on each host and installs it, right? But with Vagrant setup, what it does is it uses QEMU has a 9P server built into it. And so what it will do is it will go and build the kernel on the host, on the VM host, on the hypervisor, right? And then share that to the guests with 9P, and then the guests can go and install all that stuff. So how long does it take? It depends on your hardware, right?
Right, exactly.
On FSVM, which is the host we're using here, we have like 48 CPUs. So it, you know, within, you know, usually, you know, spinning up guests and stuff, it takes, you know, within about 10 minutes, I'm usually into the tests.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
So the kernel config is kind of pared down to just necessary modules for the guests, or
Uh,
like a default config, or?
Yeah, so the way the kernel configs are managed is kind of janky right now. The way it works is it will go and try to find, like, I'm using it, like the branch here is set to NG time. So like here, we set that. And what it does is it goes and looks in a particular directory in the Kdevops tree for a config NG time thing, and that is a kconfig. There's also one, I set a thing a while back, or I had a patch I pushed in a while back that basically said, if you've got one called config Kdevops, then I can't remember, it either falls back to that if it can't find one, or if it we'll just always use that one. I think I have it fallen back to that one. So there's ways to do this. and there are different ways to do it, but you can, push out an arbitrary kernel config and tell it to use that basically. How that happens is a little more manual than I would like.
If there's like new config options pushed in, does it like stop and prompt you?
No, it'll do it. I think it does a make old def config basically. And so it basically will you'll get whatever the defaults are. So if you've got new config options, you probably want to go and set that up and drop the new config into the tree at the right spot. So I can show you where that is in a minute. But anyway, it will do all this stuff to pull all this stuff down. I think you can even tell it to pull a patch off the mailing list and apply that too. So,
It opens your mail and starts rooting around.
well, it goes and looks at more, I think, and it uses V4, I think, to do that. Just slurp it down. So yeah. So when you do this, so there's a couple different ways you can use this thing. One of the things that says, it asks whether you want to do a dedicated or non-dedicated workflow. It took me a little while to figure out what this means, but when you do a non-dedicated one, basically what it does is it's going to spin up a single guest. And then the expectation is that you're hacking away at this thing and you want a pet guest to go and play with, right? Most of the time I'm doing a dedicated workflow though, which basically means it's going to spin up the guest VMs in a particular way and then, run those tests automatically for me. So like, for instance, if I'm running, so there's a bunch of different test suites it can run. I can run FS tests, block tests, CXL. I've never used block tests or CXL or the certain kernel self-test. I thought I'd play with it last one. But I did but FS tests and PyNFS we use.
Would it make sense to put an NFS test?
Yes, it would do that. Patch is welcome. Yeah, it's on my to-do list. I just have that, it's some work to get all this stuff working. So, and I've been meeting out bugs and, FS tests at the moment. So, but in any case, once you pick this, you can go and say, okay, I want, say I'm going to do FS tests here, right? And after that, we'll bring up this menu that's got a bunch of stuff about how you want to run FS tests. So you can, here, you can test any of these file systems, right? And so in this case, I want, there it is, NFS. So, and then we got, it's got a bunch of options, but basically you come down here, and it can run like a watchdog sort of process that will kind of try to detect when there's hung guests and things like that. Oh yeah, hang on a second. Yeah, it says configure how an NFS test should be tested. So by default, I just have it set up to do the default out options. But if you go through here, you can tell it to like, I can test NFSv4, I can test V3, and it will spin up a separate guest for each of these, right? And so in this configuration here, if I select all these, I'll end up with 4 different VMs. One for the NFS server and 3 guests for the clients. And so anyway, there's a bunch of options down here about, which tree you want to use. By default, Kdevops will use, it has its own, Luis maintains a fork, basically where he tries to keep it fairly stable. Sometimes upstream FS tests will break things. So if you're pulling down like the latest bleeding edge FS tests, you may find some things fail occasionally, you know how it is, right? So he just tries to keep a stable one there. A lot of times I'll point it at my own, personal, FS test repo, especially if I have a new test I'm trying to make sure it gets run. And then you tell it which group you want it to run. There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? But anyway, let's say we've all done all this, walked through the Kconfig, and now we have a configuration, right? So the next thing it's going to do is the rest of the testing in this thing is really driven by make. Right? So we can do a make help, just like you would with the kernel. And if I scroll up, here you can see there's a bunch of, options. But the first thing we do is just a make. And so what make does is it's going to go take all the Kconfig options, and then it, like for Vagrant, it will create what's called the Vagrant file with this sort of a Ruby script that then goes and, which is how Vagrant works in the back end and spins up its case. So it goes and generates a bunch of like config files and stuff in there. So if you make changes to the Kconfig, a lot of times, what I've found to screw, like I'll do something, this didn't work, and then I'll go back, I forget, I forgot to run make and have it regenerate some of these files. It tends to be a little conservative about, like if you've got vagrant guests up and running, it will try not to clobber the vagrant file that you have, because doing that can make it tough to tear down the guests. So, yeah. In any case, I've got this set up now. Let's see.
I wish that worked for me.
Yeah,
That's,
I could take a look at it with you here soon. Chuck's been having some problems getting it to run, but why did it only send? Oh, okay. Oh, I got to make destroy here. I had actually a guest actually running. So this is when you want to tear down guests, you go and tell it to, you do a make destroy, and it will like shut down the VM and delete all the files that are associated.
This as well?
Yeah, all those sparse files I was talking about, I will clean those up too, yeah. So in any case, now I don't have any guests running, so I can, one other thing, I'll side note. There are two different ways you can run libvirt. One is the one most of us are used to, which is where you run libvirt as a system service, kind of where it runs as root. But you can also run, VM guests as yourself, as your own user. And I have it set up to do that here. So it will run these guests as, as my user on the host. And, you just have to make sure that your user has access to the proper directories and all that kind of stuff anyway. So in any case, I did a make here, and then I do, I'm going to do a make again, because I think it probably didn't regenerate my vagrant files correctly. Because I had a guess it was still running, right? So in any case, I'll do that again now. Unfortunately, all this really depends on Ansible a lot. And Ansible, while it's great for a lot of things, it's very slow, because it's constantly logging in SSH to the connect, to the server, and then logging back out, logs back in, back out. So it takes a while to do all this stuff. We probably ought to take some of these Ansible plays and squish them together, have an Ansible play, run this script. And so you don't have to do quite so much log in, log out overhead.
there's probably some like SSH optimizations too.
Probably are.
Trying these different application methods.
Yeah, but that's one of my gripes with Ansible, is that it just tends to be pretty slow. It's running all the plays that it does. Okay, anyway. So now we've got our run make and everything. We've generated the files. Next thing you do is just do a make bring up. And this will bring up all the guests and configure them. So it will bring up guests. It will, if you've told it to, update the packages on the host, it will do that. For the NFS server, it goes and does the basic, get the NFS server running. For Fedora and RHEL guests, it will set up SE Linux so that the exported, the exported directories have, you have full access to them and stuff too. So it does a bunch of like this kind of stuff behind the scenes. But right now you can see it's like, spinning up a new guest basically. Takes a minute. And unfortunately we'll have 4 of them, so it does them in the serial. So this takes a minute.
So there's the vagrant box images or whatever. Does it cache them somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah, it will.
So it doesn't have to go suck them down.
No, not every time. Occasionally, if you find that I've had to go and, when I've had to tear down guests manually because I screwed something up, I've had to go in and kind of clean a lot of that stuff out and have it slurp it down again. But, most of the time, no, it doesn't do it at once.
So while we're waiting, you said you haven't run the self-tests?
No,
Is
I
it
haven't.
is it like the K unit stuff? Or is it
Pretty
some
sure.
other-
Or there's a case self-tests maybe.
Yes, there is.
And I think it's those. So, but it probably would be nice to maybe combine the unit tests in there with that. When they
Just add another radio box for K unit.
Yeah, could do that. Sure. Again, it's a fair amount of scripting that has to go around adding a new workflow like this. So, and it's in a lot of different places too. You end up finding, I got to go change this thing way over here. And there's a lot of
Because I saw when you were going through the menus earlier, it was like, this is the path to QEMU x86, QEMU-system-x86-64 or whatever.
Yeah.
Remember the QEMU command? Because when I was trying to run Chuck's K unit stuff, the K unit.sh, like, it was expecting it like that to be in a certification.
Mhm.
Rel, it's not, like, it's not
Yeah.
even, like, the package is
Mhm.
there, so I had some trouble. So just on Rel.
Yeah, I haven't played with the, like I said, I haven't really played with that stuff. So any case, now it's spinning up all these guests, right? And one of the things it does is it will generate a different, it will generate a private key for all these things, and then it will, sort of a throwaway private key for the SSH key, and then install those on the guests. One of the things Vagrant does is when it spins up the guest, it will create a user named Vagrant on there. And then Kdevops will configure your SSH config so that you can just SSH into this guest without necessarily needing to know the address. So it will go, gives a sense of, I'll show you what it does here in just a minute once it's done. But unfortunately, this takes a while. So now we've got the guests are up. So now it's got to do a bunch of stuff about, it's going to go and configure it all. It takes a few minutes.
Is it also going to build a kernel for NFSd?
Not yet. What bring up is just to bring up the hosts, right?
Gotcha.
So there's another make target, make Linux, which says build and install a kernel on this host, right? Given all the Kdevops stuff that we gave it earlier.
And it builds on the guest. Or builds on
It
the
builds
host.
on, it depends. If you're running Terraform, it will build one on every host. And I think you can configure Vagrant to do that too, but most of the time we just build it on the VM, on the hypervisor, right?
And you schlep.
And then share it out to the guests. So I know they hit some problems a while back because 9P's cache coherency is kind of shitty. The client, 9P client doesn't invalidate caches that's quite as effectively as NFS does. And so when you go and they had cases where they've gone and shared the thing and then done stuff, and then because the cache didn't get validated, it didn't work right.
So I can bring back the old VSOC.
Yeah.
Why can't we just share it through NFS?
You could, but you would have to run an NFS server on the host. QEMU has 9P built in, and you can just say, share this to the guest.
Remember with all the VSOC, 4, 5, 7
Yeah,
years ago?
yeah.
That was the solution. So you could share files between a host and a guest using NFS.
And
we
you
shut
shut
it down.
this before the network is configured on the guest.
Yeah, we shut it down and then went with the 9P.
Well, I think NFS has a little too much IP address, internal knowledge baked into it. So it was difficult for us to fit.
Yeah.
But now we're passing sockets.
And installing the kernel from the repo, assuming you just give it the URL. Repo,
What I do is hold down, what I've been doing you mean like if you've got like a rel guest or something like
well, no,
that?
you mentioned like you can give it like this, the GitLab stuff. Install a kernel from.
Well, you can point it at the Git tree and it will slurp down the Git tree and.
But I thought you had pointed out something else.
Well, like if you were doing, for when I'm doing rel testing, I typically want to use, kernels that we built in our, that are build artifacts for merge
That's
requests, right?
exactly what
And so what I do is I pull down, usually there's a way to find the repo file in there for the thing, and I just pull down that repo file and I drop it into the directory here and say, plop this on all the guests, and it will go drop it in the directory and stuff. So
Okay, so it drops the repo file in the thing, and then how does it figure out? I'm just wondering, like, how long has this been in Kdevops? 'Cause
I added,
That was the
added
stuff
it.
that I had Evan working on.
Oh,
And
okay.
my
I
stuff
added it, not,
recently, but
yeah.
we could have just poached it from Kdevops.
I did it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know, something like that.
So roughly at the same time frame.
Yeah, probably. So, and unfortunately, it's not very smart about, I don't have a way to tell it, oh, install this particular kernel. So I'm just relying on the fact that it's probably later than what's in the other repos.
Okay.
And,
So
and
you maybe could poach some stuff from one.
yeah. And it may, it's probably not too hard to add that. It's just a matter of pulling it in,
It's just a matter of listing what's in the repo and.
Yeah. So now I should have some guests up, right? But like I said, I got 4 of them. Let's say I go to, what it's going to do though is it puts the guests, and unfortunately it doesn't clean out any old ones. So the last 4 guests in this, or last 4 entries in this file would be the ones that are for this particular, maybe down here. I don't know. Oh, maybe it puts, it puts them up at the top of the funnel. Yeah. So anyway, these 4 entries up here will be, for the new guests that I just spun up. And so it adds a bunch of stuff, and notice it points to this, to the identity file here. And then, so, you're not using your personal SSH keys here. It points them at a particular, one-off SSH key and stuff. So in any case, if I go now, I can say I want to SSH to like Kdevops NFSd, right? And I'm logged into, now I can log into that host, right? And, run, see the NFSd is up and running. It shows, there won't be any guests yet, or won't be any exports yet, because basically what it does is it spins up the NFS server, and then it doesn't configure any exports yet, because that's up to the guests or the clients to do, because they need to go and say, hey, I need an export for this. The reason I did that is because if you're running FS tests in particular, it tries to, some of the tests will try to fill up the file system. And so if you're trying to run XFS tests on this, on the same export from multiple guests at the same time, they will interfere with one another, and then you get random failures that are not expected. So anyway, we've got all this stuff now. The other thing it does too that I added was it will set up for all the guests that we spun up. It adds the host entries on our guest stack too, so we can mount using host names, do stuff like that. Now, okay, we've got our guests up. We go make Linux. And this will go slurp down that kernel, slurp down the latest, whatever that GitLab branch or that GitHub or Git branch is, and go and build a kernel for me. Again, patience. A lot of times I'll go, make and make bring up and make Linux, and I go make a sandwich or something. Let it run while or go for a walk, something like that, right?
Walk your dog.
Yeah, exactly. Go walk the dog or something, right? So
You gotta run and make sandwiches.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Pseudo make sandwiches.
that's right. That's right. And the other unfortunate thing is it does a lot of redundant work. I think, Kdevops does. A lot of the Ansible playbooks do sort of some of the same stuff over and over. So probably that could be a lot more efficient, but it's,
It seems awesome, but also really confusing
it is.
how to get like a recipe in there set up.
Yeah, and one of the things I don't have can't show here, but the way I've started using it really is I have multiple Kdevops trees on the host. And so I have one that I just use for upstream testing, where I'm pulling down kernels and doing that stuff. I have a Kdevops-rel directory where it's just a different checkout and a different configuration in there. And I just kind of, and it's not a huge tree, so you can have multiple copies sitting around.
So the state Kdevops directory project is stateful based on its current Kconfig.
Yes.
So you can't simultaneously use the same Kdevops directory to run multiple tests that are different.
Correct. Right. Yeah. You'll end up clobbering some config file you needed or something like
So you
that.
like turn that config file into like a a state will be big about.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So, you know, again, if you want to go in and twiddle the config, and that, you know, just, you know, you can't just spin up guests and start kicking them off and then go twiddle the config and do it again, right? So, you know, another thing, well, here, I have to wait till Carmen gets done building, but it'll, you know, the other thing too, as I can show you, there's this setting in there where you can set the prefix for the guests. So if you notice all these have a prefix of Kdevops dash NFS default, you know, Kdevops dash NFSv4. For like the rel ones, I have a rel dash, you know, stuff like that. You know, so you can put an arbitrary string in there, and that way you can, if you're doing multiple tests at the same time, you can tell which guests are for which, you know, for which run.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, like I said, I mean, a lot of this is, you know, it's not a very, if you're expecting a nice polished project, like you would, a product like you would grab off the shelf and drop onto your computer and run, this is not the project for you. You will, you know, there's a lot of you know, getting in here and getting your hands dirty. Even when things work great, you end up having to do some scripting a lot of times. Or doing some troubleshooting to try to figure out why Ansible didn't do what the hell it was supposed to do, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's, you know, a lot of that kind of thing. But again, my experience has been so far that pretty much every CI infrastructure I've ever touched has been like this. And so they're all like that, you know, it's no worse than a lot of them. You know, this is not really a CI infrastructure like you would think of. Like usually when I think CI, I'm thinking like Jenkins or Buildbot, you know, or something like that. You know, something that runs in the background and, you know, kind of just, you know, as people push in changes, it goes and automatically does this. You know, Kdevops is not really geared for that sort of use case. It's more geared toward your kernel developer. You've got some patches you want to test. You know, go out and make sure that they all do the right thing, right? You know, so you're kind of kicking all the stuff off and driving it from your desktop, or from a particular host. But then eventually, it, you know, you know, it's not going to give you like a nice web page to go look at for, you know, see the dashboard or anything like that. There is some support for running tests in a loop, and I can show you how that works in a minute. But you know, they tend to you know, but it doesn't, and it will like you can tell it to run this test run all this test suite 100 times, right? And email me if, you know, if something fails in the middle of it, right? You know, or email me at the end if the thing succeeded, right? You know, they ran 100 times without failing, but most of the time it, you know, I'm not doing that. Occasionally I do. That area I think of the project needs a lot of work. So I mean, it does basically what I needed to do, but it would be nice. You know, there's a lot of fit and finish areas for mailing reports and stuff like that. That would be nice to have a little better. So I'm hoping all you guys will get in here and contribute. Fix that up for us. So. So yeah, it's built and installed the kernels now. It's just kind of got to go do all the grub update stuff and everything.
Is this running on the laptop or did you SSH over?
Yeah, I'm SSH'd into a host inside our firewall, where it's kind of like a big 48 CPU box we've got sitting around with a bunch of memory. Yeah.
What operating system is running on the hypervisor?
Fedora 38. Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
I have not gotten a F38 working at all.
Interesting. Okay.
It fails when you type make.
Okay. We'll have to take a look at what's going on with your setup. I'm not sure.
You mean Kdevops or running on Kdevops?
So here you can see it like pulled down this kernel that I've got. And then it's installed them on all those, and now we're just waiting for it to come back up.
So the little grub stuff, is that in a playbook, or is that
Playbook.
using Ansible modules that do grub, or is it just using?
I don't know. I didn't write that.
Command?
I didn't write that stuff, so I don't know. I'd have to go look.
I was looking for Ansible modules that would, you know, update grub. I couldn't find.
Yeah, that was all written before I started the project. sure work on projects. I haven't really touched it. It's basically just works for me. So I haven't needed.
Is it, yeah, because I mean, you can operate under the assumption that whatever you're installing is newer than what's in the image, but that might not always be true. Like if you're,
Yeah.
say you want to do like a bisect or something,
Yeah.
then you know, might be installing older kernel targets, in which case you can't always assume that whatever it just installed is what the machine can boot to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it does set up, I mean, when it installs a kernel like this way, I think it sets up Grub to make sure that it boots to that kernel. Yeah, and I have used this to run a bisect where I've gone and just basically done, because you can go, I could push out and do more commits to this branch and then say make Linux again, and it will build an install kernel. And it keeps the old tree around, so it does an incremental build. It's pretty fast. So I've used that to do, basically run a bisect, but to determine whether the test worked or not. All right, so now we have guests up, we have new kernel on it. So now the next thing is to make FS tests. And what this does is it's just going to pull down the FS test tree, build it, install all the dependencies it needs, all that kind of stuff, right? And again, it takes a few minutes. Not the most exciting project to sit down and watch, but
But once you go through all these steps, you can just push changes to your tree to make Linux,
and
make tests.
yeah, and then make it, yeah.
So you skip all the intermediate steps that we're going through, right?
Some of them, like when you make FS test, like I said, it's slurping it down. It's going to build FS test locally, install it locally, get it ready to go, right?
Right.
But then once you do that, we'll run another target called make FS test dash baseline, which will basically run the FS tests, or basically will run FS tests and grab, gather the results. That takes, a good several hours for FS.
And you can skip to just make Linux, make it test based on.
Yeah. Once you've done make FS test once, all that's in there, and this doesn't need to do it usually.
So this architecture that you're building for testing sticks around.
Yeah.
For as long as you want to do the testing in this specific architecture.
Yeah, and so but if you run make FS tests again, it will blow away the directory and reslurp the thing down and do it all again. So if you screw something up in there, you can go and kind of fix it. Haven't asked. I mean, if anybody's got questions on the call too, feel free to speak up. I'm not waiting we don't need to wait till the end.
I'm curious about the bisection. How long does it take to bisect? I mean, these are taking many minutes.
It depends. I mean, it's faster than doing a bisect by hand if you've got to run it on a different host.
Obviously.
Yeah,
But if you're running like full XFS tests to bisect it.
Right. Now usually I don't do that. Like when I ran the bisect, basically I isolated down a particular test that was failing,
When you're really interested.
and I would just use make Linux. I would do make Linux and then log in and run the test, and then I'd
So how
get bisect bad or good.
Remind me
Right?
how long it makes Linux took here? I mean,
It took me it ran in about 5 minutes or so. But that was if with a bisect, you're toward the end, you're getting down to the small changes, and the make Linux it's pretty fast, because it
because it just has one or two batches
Yeah.
to apply.
Yeah, it just goes and change, it just needs to build the deltas.
Only a couple of donos and it's done.
Yeah.
So is the build is it just using local disk or is it using a RAM disk? Is it
Yeah, local disk. It has a, you can tell it where to put it.
cache or anything like that?
Nah,
Because I mean, you can speed it up
probably could.
significantly.
Yeah,
We just throw like a RAM disk in it.
patch is welcome.
Bisection is really compelling. I mean, just,
Yeah. Having a lot of that automated out is really handy,
Yeah.
and it makes it,
And less error prone too.
right, because that's the thing, is I end up screwing something up, when I do a bisect and, not have to
Work
you're
and
like,
discover
God
it's all-
damn it, I did this wrong in the middle step, and, yeah, I've been there, so, yeah, you don't have all that pain here,
Okay.
So,
You make Ansible more chatty on the fly, or do you need to actually go in? Is there a case?
yeah, there is
Make menu option.
yeah, there's actually just like with a kernel build, when you, like, you can run make, capital P equals
Yeah.
equals 1, 2, that works here too. So, and it will, and I think when you do, when you crank it way up, you basically, it'll have Ansible dump debug output where it will show actually what it's doing. And I've had to use that a few times too, to figure out what was going wrong. So,
So that would teach you.
yeah.
I think I asked you this at lunch, but I'll ask again.
Okay.
When it's building the kernel, it's running a shell script to do it, or it's running a plain?
I don't
Playbooks
know.
Don't produce any output until the command is done.
Yes.
So like if you know, which means if the kernel's taking a long time to build, you're just kind of sitting there wondering, is it actually doing anything or not, versus if it was just running a shell script, you know, it'd be a lot easier to capture that output as it's running.
Yeah, I don't think it doesn't show you any of that output. So I don't know if it's just running I'm not sure what it's doing, honestly. I'd have to go look. Like I said, I haven't twiddled in that area as much because I just haven't needed to. Okay, so you can see here where it's creating, it's adding exports and stuff like that on the host, setting up the exports and. All right, done. So, and now we can do, there's a bunch of actual make targets, right? Especially for FS tests. So, this is the one I'm probably going to use here. So, like I said, the way this thing is sort of designed is there's, they have some hosts that are considered development hosts, some that are considered baseline. Luis has kind of made some assumptions about how your workflow works. I don't like it. So, but the way the naming works is sort of funky. So,
Yeah, I prefer to see run in front as a prefix for the targets that actually run tests.
Yeah, but and this is the kind of stuff where we need to do some upstream discussion and stuff. In any case, you can run the FS test baseline, and that will give us that will run FS tests on the baseline hosts, which are considered the ones that are not the dev hosts. So if you look here, like when Ansible builds something, after we spin up all the guests, we build this thing called a Ansible host file, right? And so this shows you all of the hosts, right?
The inventory file?
Yes, the inventory, right? Yep. And so, so NFSD is it's kind of its own separate class here, but these are all in for these guys, right?
So obscure question.
Sure.
Is it possible to run stock door on the clients and the test kernel on the NFS server?
Not right now.
Oh,
Good way to do that.
They don't have to run the same kernel.
They don't there's nothing that forces that. It's just that the machinery to do what you're asking is not there.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so we could do that. That's possible to do. It's just a matter of writing the right Ansible playbooks to do it and directing them the right way. So yeah, in any case, we got all this stuff set up, and now I can say make FS tests, baseline. And so after you do this, it will spin up, and it's not very exciting to watch, unfortunately. So I won't go run that. But when it's done, it will put some files in the workflows FS test results directory under here. And so in here we have a list of kernels. Hang on.
Yes.
And so you go into here, like this is the latest one I ran. This is from a few days ago, but and then you can see like here's here are the results, right? These are the failures for the different hosts, right? So in this case, I ran. I'm running. I recently sent a bunch of patches to the FS test project for them to make it skip to fix a lot of problems with some of the requires tests and stuff where we were running like POSIX ACL tests on NFSv4 that were never going to work, that kind of stuff. So, and so I went through and did that. I went through a bunch of them. I tried to, carve out, make NFS not run the ones that are just consistently going to fail. So I still need to go in and look at why these failed. A lot of them are expected because but then you can go back and look, like there's a directory for each guest, right? So I can go look into like, let's go look at the NFS default, which is just running the default mount options. And we can say, okay, here's the 103 out bad. What happened? Oh, it ran out of space on device. So I think this is like one of those tests where I think you try to use fallocate to fill up the file system, and then it estimates wrong, or it tries to get it up to the red line on the file system, and then occasionally it estimates it wrong, especially on NFS. So that one may just need to be skipped.
So there are two use cases that I'm kind of interested in, that you haven't mentioned so far. And I don't see anything that might stop us from doing this, but one is curb rows.
Yeah, you certainly can add that. That'd be great. Yeah.
I wonder how we would use Ansible to create and distribute keys.
You just have to write the right scripting and automation for it. Yeah, it wouldn't be too hard to do. I don't think it's just a matter of sitting down to do it.
Right. And the other one is probably straightforward, but it would be to add soft iWork.
That would be nice too. Yeah.
Yeah, and run the tests over RDMA.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to see that. So both of those would be good additions. Also TLS. I want to have it.
Yes.
Right. So, well, I mean, I would like it to build a CA on the host, on the VM, on the hypervisor, or on the NFS server, and then go and distribute.
NFS server, yeah, would probably make sense. Yeah.
So that's on my to-do list too. I just haven't had time to do it.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So, so in any case, this is basically how it works. You can also run PyNFS now, and it will give you a similar set of. The way the results are presented is not quite as nice there, but it's basically it just saves the JSON files from PyNFS run, so you can help with JSON and look at it that way. See if I can show a couple of them anyway. PyNFS.
Yeah, I noticed recently
Yeah.
with the PyNFS, the output option, I don't know what the hell it's output. It's not test results. It's like garbage.
Okay.
So I had to use the JSON output.
Yeah, and that makes more sense anyway for this type of thing, where we
Well,
really.
it is if you're used to parsing it.
So you can look here, it shows all the stuff. And here there were 0 failures, right? So in this one, fortunately. So, and yeah, this one I had 1 failure, but that's because I had screwed something up in my patches, my multi-grain patches. So it caught that bug.
Nice.
Yeah. So in any case, yeah, that's pretty much it. This, like I said, it's not very pretty to look at or user friendly, but it does pretty much get the job done for, especially once you've got a good configuration working, you don't have to, you can kind of go back and keep using that and regenerate guests. So anyway, again, like I said, I got 4 guests, so I can just do a make destroy and destroy now. Oh, let's build them in the wrong rendering. There. And that should shut them all down. So for PyNFS, the dedicated workflow, I just spin up the NFS server, and then we run PyNFS from the NFS server because we don't really need a separate client for that. For NFS tests, obviously we want to do something similar to the NFS test. But I do want to add NFS test as an option here too. That's something else that's on my to-do list as well. It'd be really nice to have. Anybody else have questions? Oh, good.
How much disk usage is in that directory?
Oh, darn, I just blew it away, so now I can't tell you. But, but when it does sparse files. So, typically, for something like, so when I spin up the guests, I think I have.
You've got like 10 or 12 kernels there now, right? Has that ever been a problem? Like as you're building these different Linux kernel versions? I guess they're throwing them away after you schlep them onto the.
Yeah, I mean, I have actually, I have filled up boot before, especially when I was running a bisect once. I had too many kernels in there, and it didn't like that. Yeah, on the gas.
you probably still have the Fedora 38 cloud image in your images directory, so you can show us how that is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those are small. The really question, those are pretty negligible. They're like, maybe a few gig, right? 2-3 gig or something. But the bigger question is, the extra storage that it has, the sparse files, right? And typically what I do is that for each, like I said, each test that is running will, kind of set up its own exports. And I think I have it setting up 20 gig exports for FS tests and maybe 10 gig for PyNFS. So, if you're running 3 guests, yeah,
It's a lot.
well, but we don't,
You can't get around it. That's what you gotta do.
we have to do it and, but they are sparse files. So, and we don't typically fill them all the way up. I'd have to go run the thing and just see. Maybe I'll kick off a run and we can just see tomorrow, like take a look and just see how much space it's taking.
Yeah, I was just curious, because in my testing setup, that is a problem I have, is just basically just, so I keep every version of the kernel. So that when I do get a crash, I can grab the symbols, put it into V, figure out my backup.
We don't,
And
I
so
don't,
what typically happens for me is that I end up with I get about 20 kernels deep, and then all of a sudden, I don't have room. I'm constantly maintaining.
yeah, we don't keep historical copies of the kernels here. It pulls down. In fact, it doesn't even, by default, I think it doesn't even grab a deep tree. It just grabs whatever commit, whatever tree you pointed at, it just grabs it, pulls it down as a single commit, sort of, or it looks like a single commit. So, and when you do make Linux the next time, it doesn't save anything. So it just blows it away. I have it set up to at least put the hash string in the,
Right.
in there. So I can rebuild if I need to, hopefully the tool chain's good enough.
Yeah. I was worried on that.
But I don't, I'm not, like I said, these are really throwaway guests. So, we are pushing this stuff out. And then when we're done testing it, we tear them down. These are gone now. I can't, you couldn't resurrect them.
Right.
Okay, well, if nobody's got questions, thanks for listening.
Well done. Nice.
Well done, yeah, nice job.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Cool.
Let's see.
And we-
There's so much overlap. We're solving the same problem.
We really are, yeah.
And from a lot of stuff, I've been looking at Kdevops to see if I've already done it. I'm just wondering if maybe it would make sense to have a make option that just kind of generates a buildbot config. And then just have buildbot run the Kdevops stuff.
Yeah, you can
That way
even,
you would get your GUI, right?
yeah, you,
Stuff, and you would get your request results that get pushed in the SQLite database.
yeah, you could certainly do something like that. In fact, what you could do, you could consider that to be like a different backend. We're using Vagrant and libvirt,
Right.
and maybe there's a buildbot backend too. You could possibly do something like that. I haven't looked at buildbot enough to know what would be involved, but
It's more janky.
okay. So, well, that's, like I said, that's the nature of the beast with CI stuff.
I mean, buildbot itself is a fine product.
Yeah.
It's all the customizations that,
Right.
that I inherited from Ronnie, and then the stuff that I've been doing is.
Yeah.
They are more.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And, I think it's just the nature of the
And
beast. with
just
these things,
just
you have
looking
to-
at all the buildbot stuff, especially the playbooks and stuff, there's for one thing, there's stuff set up so it will run on a Red Hat based distro or a Red Hat based
Sure, yeah.
distro, stuff like that. I got none.
Uh,
Assuming that I'm running on,
no, I didn't actually.
I have that issue now in my setup is when I need to, let's say I do a big backport to route 7 or route 8, I can't build it all and test it under the same environment, which is my home system. So for a rel 8 build, I end up shipping out the build to FS build and then pulling it back in. And that takes time. If it's upstream, if it's like CentOS or Fedora, upstream CentOS or Fedora, I can do it locally. If it's RHEL 7, then I gotta do the same thing, and I have to build in a mock environment. So I gotta pull down a whole mock environment and then build it there, and then put it into the VMs and test. So